Good night or good day, wherever you are. My name is Alan Caseman. I am a dyslexia specialist here in Jamaica. I'm a qualified member of the British Dyslexia Association. I hold a certification allowing me to assess and diagnose students with dyslexia, as well as to intervene and support. I'm going to be producing a series of lectures, lessons, workshops where teachers can learn a little bit more about the learning difficulty, as well as ways they can intervene and support students who are diagnosed, and perhaps to spot some of the signs of dyslexia so you can refer them to specialists like myself. But firstly, what is dyslexia? So, dyslexia, according to the Rose's 2009 definition, is a learning difficulty that primarily affects the skills involved in accurate and fluent reading and spelling. Characteristic features of dyslexia are difficulties in phonological awareness, verbal memory, and verbal processing speed. It occurs across a range of intellectual abilities. That's important to note that various variations of intelligence, people with various intelligence can be impacted by dyslexia. We might have some misconceptions that people with dyslexia have lower IQs or lower intelligence. That is not the case, as you might be aware that people like Einstein um, had dyslexia. All right, so spotting dyslexia early means support can be provided sooner, preventing small skill gaps from becoming large achievement differences later on. So it's very important we spot potential signs of dyslexia early so that the correct interventions can be put in place for our learners. So things to look out for. Does the student have difficulty remembering sounds made by letters or blending sounds into words? Detecting the differences in sounds such as F, V, the, or B, or P, or D. Detecting the differences in sounds such as F, or B, P, and D. So that's very important. Letter sounds. So children with dyslexia often have a hard time working with letter sounds. So Snowling et al. 2020 concluded that the most prevalent core deficit in dyslexia is a phonological deficit that comes before literary acquisition. So when presented with words, children have to create connections from the spelling to the sounds and ultimately to the meaning of the words. For example, a child with dyslexia might struggle to decode the three phonemes in the word dog, d, g, which requires the ability to identify and blend these sounds together to recognize a word. This difficulty can impact reading fluency and accuracy, as well as overall reading comprehension. Phonological awareness is considered a defining characteristic of dyslexia because it's a crucial aspect in learning to read. So it's a very essential step, and this essential step is the most prevalent difficulty for people with dyslexia. Recognizing the letter sounds, memorizing the letter sounds, and using them to blend together to create words, therefore to create meaning. Another difficulty that you might see is speaking, knowing if a word rhymes. They might mispronounce many words, especially words with lots of syllables, or they might have been later in learning to speak and therefore slower to acquire new words. So we have to be looking out for these difficulties. Especially delayed language development is often one of the first signs, warning signs, I should say, of dyslexia. So children with dyslexia often have more language issues, including early language delay and language impairments. So ELD is when a child doesn't start combining words by a year and a half to 3 years old, or has a smaller vocabulary than most children at 2 to 4 years. So language impairment means having trouble learning and using language in different forms like speaking, writing, or using sign language. This is because speech awareness and production are crucial for learning phonology. So sounds in language, which we discussed earlier, and later understanding alphabetical knowledge. This is because speech awareness and production are crucial for learning phonology, sounds in language, and later understanding alphabetic knowledge, letters and their sounds. So slow language development and limited vocabulary can make it harder for children to learn phonology and alphabetic knowledge. So quite a lot to take in here. And this is essential for us as educators, as parents, in understanding how dyslexia can develop. Another difficulty you might notice is listening. Does the student have difficulty remembering and following a set of instructions if verbally given to them? Do they need frequent reminders to follow classroom rules and routines? Do they regularly forget what they have been told? So we've all been there as educators where you might tell a student something 1 minute, 5 minutes ago, and then they ask, what did you say earlier, miss? What was that again? Or can you reread that line? And that is why we put things on the board. We write it down, we keep it there. So listening can be a difficulty, and trying to remember instructions. So that's why it's always better for us to put instructions on the board or give the students a handout with instructions so they don't have to try to recall it and remember these instructions. So children with dyslexia often have difficulty remembering spoken information. This is often mistaken for not paying attention or not trying hard enough. And one of the reasons for that is because students with dyslexia have a difficulty storing and retrieving words efficiently, according to Johnston 2019. This can lead to poor listening skills because they may have trouble distinguishing and remembering those sounds within words. As a result, they may need constant reminders or repetition to help reinforce these sounds and words in their memory. So that is why teaching has to be sometimes repetitive. It sometimes you have to go over things, because students with dyslexia have a problem recalling the verbal information. They need constant reminders. So if you have a student that you've noticed that they also have problems with sequences and ordering things, like saying the alphabet in the correct order, or remembering the letters in their own name, or saying the days of the week, that is because dyslexia can affect that as well. And this is because of memory difficulties. Tracking the order of sounds in a word accurately is crucial for forming a reliable memory of the sound pattern. Studies indicate that individuals with dyslexia need more time to process sound order. Also, despite having good eyesight, many dyslexic children report that letters blur and seem to move around. These difficulties are linked to audio and visual nerve development impairments in the brain, which can impact their ability to correctly sequence letters and words when reading or writing. So before we move on, it's important to note that a dyslexic student, or a dyslexic person, I should say, won't necessarily have all these signs, because dyslexia affects different people in different ways. So one person might have one of these elements, another person might have more of these elements, a few. So it is varied in how it affects people. So one of the other symptoms could be naming. They might have difficulty naming the letters of the alphabet, or naming colors, or finding the right word. This is due to the impact on the brain processes in terms of language. This is due to the fact that dyslexia affects the way the brain processes language, making it hard to call things by their correct name. So here we have an example. So naming speed is a set of processes that happen in a specific order. So these processes include recognizing basic features like shapes, colors, recognizing letters, numbers, patterns, and remembering how to say these words, and finally speaking the words out loud. So naming difficulties can be caused by phonological problems, such as the letter sounds that we spoke about earlier, and by complications in other cognitive processes like verbal memory. And this leads to certain difficulties like reading. So when reading, students might get confused, dyslexic students might get confused with short common words like at, to, in, on. They might make word substitutions. Example, they might write house for home. They might make letter transpositions, for example, who and how. So as you can see there, due to difficulties in letter sound, due to difficulties in verbal memory and verbal processing, the reading becomes much more difficult because of when they're looking at words, they might start swapping over some of these words for other words that they have in their memories rather than the words they see on the page. And it's a neurological difficulty, so it's a brain difficulty that causes these types of errors due to the brain's difficulty in processing and retrieval of written language. There's another aspect of how the words might appear. Dyslexia is a neurobiological disorder characterized by difficulties in accurate and fluent word recognition, and also by poor spelling and decoding abilities. Neuroimaging studies have shown the differences in brain activation and connectivity patterns in individuals with dyslexia compared to typical readers, particularly in areas related to phonological processing. So these differences suggest that the brain processes written language differently in individuals with dyslexia, leading to the characteristic difficulties in reading and language processing seen in this population. So there have actually been studies done and, brain scans, which have shown activation in different parts of the brain and discovered that there is actually a difference in terms of how some people process language. And this difficulty is seen there as actual physical proof that there is a neurological difficulty. So in terms of encoding, so writing language, a student may write a word in several different ways in one piece of writing. You might also notice that letters have been put in the wrong order. For example, HLEP for help. They might leave out or add letters. For example, they might use code for cold. So all children make mistakes in spelling, some more than others. But in a student with dyslexia, they're very frequent and persist despite, lessons and teaching and going over the spellings. Students will find this difficult. We have some examples. So as you can imagine, if they're already finding it difficult to match sounds to written letters, spelling becomes even more difficult because some words are spelled correctly in different ways that sound the same. For example, there and there. So this inconsistency between the sounds of words and their spelling is due to patterns where the same sounds can be represented by different letters, such as the E sound in deep and heap. This is also why rapid naming is important for individuals to recognize words based on memory, which we have seen is also a difficulty observed in dyslexic individuals. So our language, English language, is a chaotic entanglement and has evolved over time from a variety of cultures and nations. And it is one of the most inconsistent patterns I've ever seen, or we've ever, well, in our experience. I don't really speak any other language, but I do know for English that there's so many different patterns students have to learn, and that's why memory is very important. And we've also seen that verbal memory can be a problem for dyslexic students. So they have verbal memory problems as well as letter sound problems. It all amounts to a very, shall we say, difficult situation, to say the least. Right, so another source of this difficulty is the family. If you're speaking to a student in your class or speaking to a parent, you might recognize, or they might let you know that they've had problems spelling, reading, understanding, comprehension. They might not have been diagnosed, but they might be dyslexic as well, because dyslexia does run in families. So there's considerable evidence indicating this. Studies involving children at familial risk of dyslexia, meaning those with at least one dyslexic parent, have shown that approximately 33 to 66% of these children develop dyslexia. In contrast, the percentage of dyslexic children born to parents without dyslexia is lower, ranging from 6 to 16%. So these findings, along with results from quantitative genetic studies, strongly suggest that dyslexia has a significant hereditary component. So you can see the numbers there, and the numbers don't lie. One dyslexic parent shows that 33 to 66% of these children develop dyslexia versus percentage of children born to parents without dyslexia, usually 6% to 16%. So it doesn't mean that if you have a dyslexic parent, you have to have dyslexia, but the chances are stronger. You will notice some strengths, of course, when it comes to a dyslexic individual. They're very creative, or can be, I should say, because nothing is always definite. But there's a strong chance they're very creative and have a good imagination. They're usually quick to grasp and think of ideas, and their talent at building models and spatial awareness is quite strong as well. But as usual, as I've said before, this is not always the case. But these are some strengths some individuals with dyslexia have been found to have. So strengths in creativity and higher level thinking process. So recent research indicates that dyslexic individuals show notable strengths in non-verbal activities across different ages and grades. The study found that intelligence and literacy skills have little to no effect on creativity levels in these children, and that children with dyslexia showed advantages in some, but not all aspects of creativity. These findings tell us that instead of focusing solely on the difficulties the child has, we as educators, parents, and educational programs should also recognize and nurture their strengths and their potential for nonverbal creativity. So implementing these effective strength-based learning strategies can help children succeed and flourish both in school and the broader society. So what that simply means is use creative aspects to engage the child. If you know that a child is good at music, use music in their learning to help them with reading and writing. If you know they're good at art, use art to help them with their writing as a prompt for them to do some creative writing on. If you know they're good at shapes and spatial awareness, implement puzzles, implement word searches, things like that to help them with their learning. So it's just about using their strengths to help them with their deficits. So overall, what are we looking for? And the British Dyslexia Association uses the Rose definition of dyslexia, and it suggests that dyslexia is best thought of as a continuum and not one distinct category. There are no clear cutoff points. As I've said, some of these elements you might strongly witness, others you might not. Dyslexia is on a spectrum, a continuum, and it might affect different individuals in different ways. Co-occurring difficulties might be seen in aspects of language, motor coordination, mental calculation, concentration, personal organization, but these are not by themselves markers of dyslexia. So these elements by themselves shouldn't be the first task to say, oh, that person has dyslexia. But Rose does say that a good indication of the severity and persistence of dyslexia can be gained by examining how the individual responds or has responded to well-founded intervention. So that simply means that if you put an intervention in place after school, an hour a week or 2 hours a week, or you've, send someone into the classroom to work with that child, and if you don't see any or a little improvement, that could be a good indication that that person has dyslexia. So, and to what extent they have dyslexia is to what extent you've seen or not seen any improvement. So we generally, if myself as a assessor has to assess a child, we need to discover what has been put in place. How has the child responded to what has been put in place? If something rigid, let's say let's not say rigid. Let's say if a robust intervention has been put in place that fosters the needs of the child, that is multisensory, that is sequential and cumulative, and over time it's supposed to build upon skills, and that child isn't responding, there's no slight improvement at all, we'll say that person has severe dyslexia. If there is some slight improvement and the improvement seems continuous, we might say that person has moderate dyslexia. However, there still needs to be an assessment. What we've just went through is like a screening. So that's something a teacher can judge and say, looking at these factors, this child has a few of these signs. There might be a case for him or her to be assessed by an assessor. That could be a clinical psychologist or a specialist like myself. So the results of all this is that dyslexia can be mild and can be severe, or it could be severe. And as such, an individual might exhibit many of these difficulties, or they might have a few. Each one could affect them in various degrees. So if you've been thinking about a student while I've been going through this in your mind, and you've answered, yes, I've seen this, to only a few of the questions, or I should say the points, you should continue to monitor the child's progress and speak to your child's teacher. if you're a parent, I should say. If you're a teacher, speak to the parent. You may also wish to consult a language, speech, or reading specialist to get a better understanding of the learner's reading issues. Or you can consult myself at Aspire Literacy, who can conduct literacy assessments or dyslexia assessments to further identify the child's needs. If you answered yes to most of these questions, you definitely need to consult the parents, or if you're a parent, school, a professional reading specialist, or a dyslexia assessor like myself to get a diagnosis done. So we have myself, a qualified assessor, ready to assess. So steps to take. I do provide pre-screening tests, which is done online. I do have the ability to do a full dyslexia assessment, a full diagnosis and report from that assessment, and I am able to one-to-one support. Here are my details. Feel free to contact. So this is lesson 1. I intend to follow up with a second lesson that goes into, let's say, an example of what a dyslexic student might go through in terms of reading and writing, and also steps to support that child in the classroom. Okay, so that is it for me today. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope this message gets sent across Jamaica. Feel free to contact me if you need any advice or support in the classroom. I'm also available to do come into the schools and do consultation and discuss ways we can make the school environment aware and supportive of learners with this difficulty. All right, so for now, I'm Alan Caseman, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.